last video, we learned how to create value using unconventional art supplies you might have lying around the house. A few weeks ago, I sent home a 30-day art challenge where students were to pick just one day and use it as inspiration to create a drawing. When their submissions came in, their drawings were awesome, but it was clear that many of them did not have their colored pencils at home that we learned to use in class. This is what prompted me to make the last video. I noticed what supplies that they had to use and showed you how to create value using those supplies. Today, I want to show you how to actually take that value and apply it to a drawing. If you're just looking to use this video to learn how to use one material, such as, let's say, crayons, you may want to fast forward since I will be going over how to use a lot of different supplies. Otherwise, I really hope this video helps you use whatever you have around the house to create an amazing drawing. Just as a reminder, value is the lightness or darkness of a color. When you create a darker value, it looks like a shadow. When you create a lighter value, it looks like a highlight. When you add a range of values, dark, light, and everything in between, your artwork will start looking more three-dimensional, like your objects are popping off the page and things will start to look a lot more realistic. If you're one of my students and are lucky enough to have your colored pencils at home, for the projects you're asked to create value and form, you can use them just the way we learned how to use them in class. Here you can see I'm using observation to create shadows and highlights and matching colors the best I can. If you need some reminders or refreshers on how to use those pencils, remember I do have several other videos reviewing how to do just that. If you don't have your colored pencils at home, today I'm going to show you how to use the supplies I used in the last video to create form on your drawing. In this video, I'll be using a number 2 pencil to create value, as well as pens, these little Crayola Pipsqueaks washable markers, crayons, these Crayola Twistables. I'm really not sure if they're crayons or colored pencils. Debatable. I think they're crayons. And last but not least, highlighters. I'm going to encourage you to pick one of all of the supplies you have around the house and do a consistent drawing with that one material. However, you're going to see me create one drawing using a little bit of each just to show you how each one can work. I'm hoping that this gives you a good idea of how to use each supply starting with number 2 pencil. When students handed in their work for the first day of the 30-day challenge, an overwhelmingly large amount of students chose the idea, my favorite candy, as inspiration. So I'm going to go ahead and use that same idea. We are in the season for my favorite candy, which is these Cadbury mini eggs. Now, if I was using colored pencil and I had all the colors I wanted, I would probably just look at the bag and choose a detail on it or the main part and copy it. However, because I'm using these non-traditional supplies, I can't color match. So I'm going to use the candy itself. I would not dare open this bag because it would be gone before I was done filming, so I decided to find a picture on the internet. Here you see me working from printed pictures, but you can work directly from your phone or computer if you don't want to use the ink. When using non-traditional supplies, you're most likely going to be either working in one color tone or grayscale, and if you are using color, you may not be able to match it exactly. So I highly recommend to convert your color picture to black and white, which is really easy to do with the filters on your phone or computer. The black and white picture really helps me see nothing but value and not be distracted by color. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold this over so that I only see the black and white picture. Now for my drawing, I'm just going to pick one Cadbury mini egg and start drawing it. Then I'll work out from there. I'm just going to do a little piece of this picture to give you an idea of how to use each material. Now that I'm done with my drawing, I could start adding value. Remember, with number 2 pencil, you're using pressure to create dark and light values. The harder you press, the darker your value. The lighter you press, the lighter your value. So I'm just going to go ahead, pick one egg, and do my best to match the value in my drawing to the value I see in the picture. Where I see the egg is dark, I'm going to press harder and then ease up on pressure in my pencil where it moves into the light value. When using number 2 pencil, or really anything else that's one color, I highly recommend starting with your medium dark tones and then working into your light tones. Save all your really dark tones that you're pressing your heaviest for last. If you use them right, those super dark tones are going to push all of your light tones up further into space, making it look more three-dimensional. If you look at this picture, I don't have any super rich dark tones on this egg. I've got gray into white. The black tones happen around it. They happen in the shadows underneath the eggs. They happen in the shadows around the bowl. So I'm going to save my really, really hard pressure for later. So here you can see I'm continuing to match the shadows in the picture, going from medium to light. I'm getting on the darker side, but I'm not going super dark with those blacks yet. When I do push really heavy with my pencil and get those rich blacks, it really takes the contrast and boosts it up. Remember, contrast is the difference between darks and lights. If you keep up a really nice contrast with a graphite drawing, with really dark darks and really light lights, you'll end up with a super successful picture. When using graphite or number 2 pencil, many people feel the need to smudge it with their finger to get a really smooth look. I do not recommend using your finger to smudge graphite. The oils in your finger pull up a lot of the pencil, and it's very, very hard to control where you're smudging. So you lose a lot of your light colors, making your whole picture look muddy. I didn't think to show this until later on in the video, but if you really want to smudge your graphite, you can make yourself a tool called a tortillon. I actually grew up calling these blending stumps. But if you just roll up a piece of paper, make sure one side is really pointy, you can use it to control exactly where you want to smudge so that you're smudging your medium and your dark values, but not losing your lights. Next, let's talk about pen. With a ballpoint pen, pressure still gets me a dark and light mark, but if I try to make a really smooth value scale, it doesn't really work. So I want to use a pen and ink technique, and I'm going to choose cross-hatching. I'll make a bunch of lines and then cross over those lines in an X pattern over and over again to get a dark mark, and where I want a lighter value, I'll make less marks. Here you can see I'm observing the values on the egg and again matching them just like I did with the pencil. The difference is I'm using little marks over and over again to make the darker value, and then as I move into the lighter value, I'm making less and less marks. When using any pen and ink technique, try your very best to imagine the curves and shape of the surface and make your marks follow along the surface you imagine. So you can see I'm going in an oval and my marks look as if they might be on the surface of the egg. The darkest marks that I'm making are on the edge of the egg where I see the shadows. And again, I'm going back in and making sure that I'm going darker later instead of starting as dark as I can, working into my light. So because again, I'm using one color, I'm working medium to light and then pushing in the darks last. Next, let's use some washable markers. I recommend if you're going to use markers that you try blending. So I chose a dark blue-green and a light blue-green. These little pipsqueaks seem to come in pretty large sets that have a lot of colors. If you have a smaller set, you might need to go with an analogous color theory, which remember is the colors next to each other on the color wheel. So you might be using red and orange and yellow, green and yellow, and that will work out just fine as well. You are going to have to use a pen and ink technique with the markers because remember, if you press heavier, you are not going to get a darker mark, you're just going to get a thicker line. If you press lighter, you'll get a thinner line. So this means you have to use the marks, the lines or dots that the marker creates to create your value. Here I'm stippling. I'm making a lot of dots very close together to get a darker value, and then as I move away from the dark value, I'm leaving more and more space between the dots, which makes it look lighter. Remember, I'm blending here, so I want to make sure I have room for my second color. I'm only addressing the darker values with the darker dots, and then when I'm ready for the lighter values, I'll go in with that aqua green, which is like a light blue green. I'll make a lot of little dots over the darker spaces and then put more and more space between the dots, finally leaving a white space for the highlight. You can use any of the pen and ink techniques that I showed you in the last video, blending with markers. Next, I'll crosshatch, but first I'm going to test my colors. It's really important that you test colors, especially when using a new material, because it might not come out the way you expect. I want to make sure that my colors truly look like a dark and light version of one another and that there's enough contrast or difference between the two. I chose a deep magenta or dark pink and a light pink. I started off by hatching or making lots of marks next to each other to make a dark value and then crossing over it, cross-hatching to make it even darker. I'm going to use those marks to go right on top of each other for the dark values, get further apart for the lighter values, and then go over that with the lighter color, doing the same thing into white. Notice I'm curving my marks to look like the curves of the egg. Next up is crayons.
Hey, those are
I
mine
highly
too.
recommend blending with crayons and not just shading. That means you want to choose 2 or more colors. In this case, I chose a very dark blue and a very light blue. When using crayons, really just use it exactly like the colored pencils we all know and love so well. Start out with heavy pressure giving you your dark value, color in ellipses, color over the same spot in different directions, and then ease into your lighter value by pressing lighter and lighter. When you go into your second color, color heavy over all of those light spaces in the dark value, and then get lighter and lighter to white for your natural highlight. The great thing about crayons is they're very waxy, so you can layer over them if you find you need some darker values. I found that my dark blue wasn't quite as dark as I originally thought, so I was able to go in and get a really dark blue, I think it was a blue violet, and push in my dark values right over what I had already colored. Next, I used the same crayon technique with a dark and a light pink. Next, let's talk about a few different ways you can use highlighters. You can take a ballpoint pen or Sharpie and use any one of these pen and ink techniques. I'm going to use the scribbling technique, which I haven't used yet. Create that dark and light value just as you would as if you weren't adding highlighter, but then when you're done, instead of just leaving it the way it is, add a little pop of color and vibrance to it by putting some highlighter right over your dark value. Now, if you have several different colored highlighters, you can actually use them just like markers. Here I have an orange and a yellow. Again, you're not going to find a dark and light version of one color in a highlighter, so you'll have to use the analogous colors or color wheel colors and use them just like markers. Start with your darker color, use a pen and ink technique, and then add your lighter color in the lighter values. Now for those twistables, choose 2 colors that work together. I'm choosing green and yellow. Just make sure one looks darker than the other. Start with the darker value and fill in with the lighter one. Now, for those of you who learn how to create realistic shadows using complementary colors or opposite colors on the color wheel, this is how it worked out with crayon. I do have a video on this, so you could always watch how to mix the opposite colors, but yellow is opposite purple on the color wheel. So I started with the yellow, and remember with crayon, you can actually layer them one over the other because they are so waxy. So I started with a light yellow and then layered over it with a darker yellow, and then I took some purple and actually pushed it right into that dark yellow, and it did create quite a nice realistic looking shadow. So it can be done. Feel free to experiment. If you know how to use more expensive materials, try using these less expensive materials in the same way, and it just might work out. Now, I'm just going to use the pencil to fill out this little drawing and make it look a little bit more complete. I think that is my favorite of all of these tools, is just a number 2 pencil. I'm sure I would get bored of it fast if I was doing a lot of work at home in just the pencil, because I would want to definitely use color later on. But for this first project, since it works so much like colored pencil, you might just want to stick to the number 2 pencil and really make sure that you're shading. I hope that this video helps you use the supplies you might have around the house to create some amazing artwork. You're staying happy, safe, and healthy, and happy creating!
Happy creating!